Hello and welcome to the memory card. The Nintendo Wii often gets a bit of the short stick and often just remembered as a kid's console that's full of shovelware, but that's not accurate to the console that it was. It actually had a lot of phenomenal games on it. One of the best aspects of the Wii actually was that it had two great Kirby games on it. Kirby's Return to Dreamland and one of my favorites in the series, Kirby's Epic Yarn. Kirby's Epic Yarn was released in 2010 and was developed by Goodfeel, not the usual just straight up HAL Laboratory, which is the company that usually made the Kirby games. And Goodfeel did a very, very good job with Kirby's Epic Yarn. It does a lot to switch up the Kirby formula. You're not inhaling enemies and taking their abilities this time around. You're essentially hitting them with your Yarn Whip, and you can turn them inside out and use them as projectiles. But there's still a lot of staples of the Kirby franchise, mainly being the cute aesthetic and the vast gameplay variety. Something reminiscent of Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo, or all the different forms that Kirby can turn into, which makes sense considering Kirby's made out of yarn this time around, a lot more malleable. There'll be sections where you're a tank blasting things around, or you're going into water in your little submarine, or if you double tap on the D-pad left or right, you can dash and you turn into a little car. All these little transformations are really endearing and help make the game that much more charming, which Kirby's Epic Yarn has plenty of that. Only a few games are as charming and endearing as Kirby's Epic Yarn, few which would be Yoshi's Woolly World and Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's Story, among many others. Now, for the most part, in Kirby's Epic Yarn, you're playing with the Wiimote sideways like this. In a lot of Wii games, you would hold it like this, like you're slashing or pointing at the screen. And you do point the screen a little bit in the game for little side things where you're decorating homes, but for the most part, you're holding it sideways and basically playing it like an NES controller, although there is some motion control here and there, like when you're in the tank mode, you turn the Wiimote side to side to aim up and down on the 2D plane, and it actually works really well. You'd think that considering the small D-pad on the Wiimote, which is actually about the same size as the D-pad on the GameCube controller, it actually isn't as uncomfortable as you might think. It actually works really well for controlling this game, and the general simplicity of the input, the fact that you just basically have the D-pad and the 1 and 2 button on the Wiimote, basically functioning as A and B on an NES controller, it helps make the game simple and accessible, but still very fun. Now, in Kirby's Dream Land, I talked about the adaptive difficulty that's commonplace in the Kirby franchise, and nowhere is that more applicable than with Kirby's Epic Yarn. If all you're trying to do is beat each level, it is extremely easy because you can't die in this game. Every time you get hit, you lose some gems, and that's important if you're like me and you're trying to get gold medals on each level. And with some of the later levels, you basically can't get hit at all if you want that gold medal in the level. So the game can get actually really hard if that's what you're going for, like when I play it. So like with a lot of Kirby games, it's about as hard as you want it to be. The story in Kirby's Epic Yarn isn't extremely deep as you would expect, but it is extremely charming in the way it's delivered in a storybook fashion, like a narrator is telling you, reading a story from a children's book. Now, it might sound like that could be condescending, like the narrator's talking down to you, but it's not delivered in that kind of way. It's not insulting, it's just very sweet, and there's some very genuinely funny moments, not like a great comedy like Spaceballs or Blazing Saddles or something like that. No, it's just more nice, charming little lines here and there and deliveries. And throughout the story, it's essentially just Kirby trying to save the day like usual, except he's not in Dreamland or Planet Popstar, I think it's called. He's in Patchland, and he's trying to help Prince Fluff, who's essentially a blue Kirby. And you're basically just trying to stitch the land together, just continuing with the yarn and crafts motif. And the addition of Prince Fluff is cool because throughout this entire game, you could play this entire game with local co-op with someone sitting right beside you with a Wiimote in hand, and that's a very fun way to play this game. I actually played a fair amount of the levels in this game in co-op like that when I was up in college, and it was really fun, honestly. This game is great not only for people that have played a lot of platformers that are just big fans of the Kirby franchise like myself, but it's also really great for introductory games for people that don't play games very often because they're intimidated by big action-packed games. Something a lot more low-key and stress-free like a Kirby game, especially this game. It works really well as a soft entry point into video games. Now, if I'm talking about how easy the game generally is, and the cutesy aesthetic and the very chilled out music for the most part, which is quite different and a departure from the series, because usually Kirby music is a lot more energetic than the music in Kirby's Epic Yarn. In Kirby Epic Yarn, it's essentially a lot of piano music and very low-key chill music. And it fits the arts and craft aesthetic, but it is definitely a departure from the Kirby franchise in regards to music. But, as I was saying, since the game is not really all that difficult, you might think that it could get really boring or that might be safe, like too safe. Too much like other Kirby games, but with the changes done with being made out of yarn, not being able to copy abilities and that kind of thing, the game picks up that slack in a lot of really cool, creative ways. For instance, in the different transformations, like I said before, but also in just really great level design and fun bosses to fight. It's just a game that will have you smiling from ear to ear the whole time you're playing it. Which, to be fair, it could be said for most of the Kirby franchise, but there's just an intangible quality and magic to this game that transcends even most Kirby games. And that's saying something because, to me, the Kirby games are pretty high up on my list of favorite game franchises, and Kirby's Epic Yarn is one of the best Kirby games out of that entire franchise, so praise doesn't get too much higher than that from me. Now, there's a part I mentioned earlier about home decoration, and that's a minor aspect of the game. Throughout the levels, you'll find different little extras, like soundtracks, CDs, so you can listen to them if you want to when you're not in a level. And you can also find decorations for Kirby's own room in Patchland, and also for decorating the rooms for other tenants as well. And this is a very minor aspect of the game. You don't really have to focus on it that much aside from when they show you how to do that in the tutorial where you're using the Wiimote pointer to arrange the furniture in the room, which works really well. As would be expected from first-party Nintendo games, they use the Nintendo controllers better than most companies do, and Kirby's Epic Yarn is no exception. Even though it doesn't really use a whole lot of motion controls aside from just aiming as the tank or pointing when you're arranging the furniture, it never feels shoehorned in, and it always feels responsive and never detracts from the gameplay. Honestly, it's very easy for me to recommend Kirby's Epic Yarn. It's some of the most fun I ever had with the Wii's library, and it was a very early game that I got whenever I bought my Wii U. Whenever I found out that the Wii was completely backwards compatible with the Wii, I started investing in Wii games that I missed out on because, unfortunately, like the GameCube, I judged the Wii pretty harshly back in the day whenever it was new. I mostly played the Xbox 360 and then at the tail end of the generation sold it and traded it for a PS3. But I always discounted the Wii as a kiddie console with a lot of trash shovelware games. I bought into that crap. And unfortunately that means I missed out on a lot of great games like Kirby's Epic Yarn and Skyward Sword and Mad World and No More Heroes whenever they were new. But luckily, it meant that whenever I got my Wii U in December 2015, I was able to catch up on a lot of awesome Wii games for not too much money. Thankfully, a lot of great games on the Wii aren't all that expensive just because it's one of the best-selling consoles ever made, so a lot of the best-selling best games on the system are fairly common, so they aren't too expensive. Like Kirby's Epic Yarn, it's one of the cheaper Kirby games you'll find, honestly, and it's definitely not one to pass up. It looks fantastic on the Wii U, but for all the gameplay I showed in this review, it was all recorded off of my Wii, mostly for authenticity's sake. But trust me, Wii games, especially Kirby's Epic Yarn, look fantastic on the Wii U. It's part of the reason why I think people should go out and buy Wii U's, even if they have a bunch of Wii games already. The Wii U, even if you don't pick up some of the great games on that system, it's a great way to play your Wii games in HD. It is really easy for me to recommend Kirby's Epic Yarn. It is a fantastic game and a really great, consistently great franchise. Honestly, it's probably my favorite, if not my favorite Kirby game, at the very least in the top 5. Which is saying a lot because, like I said, the Kirby franchise is so consistently great. It's one of the most consistent franchises in the entire video game industry, honestly. There's not really any duds. There's some that people might not like as much as others, but there's not really any bad Kirby games. But regardless of whether you're going to play this on a Wii or a Wii U, just pick it up and play this game. Don't let the cutesy art style, which I might happen to love, which I do, don't let that put you off or just think that's a game for little kids, because it is really, really fun. Do not pass up on this game. It is fantastic. But regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the memory card.